If you're in as a founder, you're in for 10 years, which I think is just fucking dumb. It's not true. It's this paradox where you always want to do something creative, exciting, new that's groundbreaking. And what actually happens when you start a business is, yes, you have that rush, but then you get the itch again because it's in your nature to create something new. And so you get in this sort of trap. I should have left 3 years ago. So now, as a second, third, or fourth time founder, the thing I'll be thinking about a lot more is I ended up getting so burnt out that you just can't work. And as a result, you have to delegate because otherwise nothing gets done. So don't do that. I'm hearing a lot more chat about VCs starting to try and kick out founders and appoint professional CEOs if the business is looking healthy. Oh God, this goes a bit deep.
Welcome.
Thank you.
To the show.
Yeah,
So
good to be
excited
here.
to have you here. Thank you for trekking all this way to South London.
No problem.
Even when I look like I've just come out of a wall.
Like a metaphor of a founder, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. This is what happens. I always start these conversations by asking people to introduce themselves.
So yeah, I'm Sho. I guess I'm an entrepreneur now, although I never thought I was for a long time. But I've been in tech for 7-8 years, and I'm actually just about to step back from my first company, which is pretty exciting, and switch to my second company, which is in the process of being incorporated. But I work in financial services, and prior to that, I was in nonprofit work. And prior to that, I guess my origins are in Japan, where I grew up. But I've kind of lived in different countries. I'm one of those, well, I was lucky enough to travel quite a bit and be educated in different places. So quite a nebulous identity there that I have as well. So yeah, that's me at the highest level.
Yeah, you have been some very cool places. You went to boarding school in Vancouver.
Yeah.
Went and worked at an NGO in Brazil.
Yeah.
With no Portuguese.
0 at the time, yeah. Well, I had Spanish, but I thought the Spanish I was being taught, I thought it was Portuguese. Long story for another time. It's like...
Have made that mistake.
Have you made that? Yeah.
I've tried speaking Spanish in Portugal.
Oh, really?
Like,
yeah, they're
what
like,
are you
what are
talking
you doing?
about?
Yeah. So no, I have lived there too. That's true. Yeah.
Okay, so talk to me about the transition from Pave to the new company
Fuse, yeah. Well, I mean, so we incorporated Pave almost 7 years ago. And so I've been CEO of that company since then. Did some funding rounds and scaled down the team with COVID and all this stuff. And now we're at the point where we're quite a small company still, but serving quite a few users. We've reached, 500,000 people in the UK over time. And
wow.
we're closing in on profitability and all this stuff. And many other things happened, of course, but after 6-7 years, had been feeling it was time to try something new. And I think you do get, it's this kind of paradox where as a founder, right, you always want to do something creative, exciting, new that's groundbreaking. And what actually happens when you start a business is, yes, you have that rush, and yes, you get that for a certain amount of time, but then you get the itch again because it's in your nature to create something new. And so you get in this sort of trap, ironically. And I certainly started feeling that dilemma 2-3 years ago, I would say. So quite a long time now. But it was very hard to find the right moment to exit the current company. And I also didn't know what I wanted to do. So in parallel, started building this new thing internally, which I don't recommend as a process, by the way, because legally it gets very complicated if you do that. But anyway, sorry, going into detail too much. Now I'm spinning out this new business called Fuse, which is again in a related field and using some of the technology that we've built over the last 7 years. And yeah, I'll be leading that as CEO, but I am going to take I think 2 to 3 month break in between, hopefully. I guess we haven't even talked about this. It's news since we last spoke, but that's been a big update that quite literally just started happening Well, the legals just started happening today. So yeah.
That's about as fresh as it gets.
Yeah, exactly. It's been in planning for a while, but yeah.
I very much empathize with that itch to go and create something new.
Yeah.
But 7 years in, you've held out for a good long time. Obviously, the
think
itch
so.
came a couple of years ago, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, with this stuff, it's like it can be constant, right? As a founder, you always like will spot something, and you're like, that's actually really interesting. And I think it kind of links to broader points, but one thing I definitely learned from this experience is, if I'm totally honest, I should have left 3 years ago, probably. Yeah, because as soon as you sense this feeling of like you're going to work because you kind of have to, you don't feel personal momentum. And well, at that point, frankly, like there are better people to take over your company. And this whole idea that the founder CEO has to stick around, I think, is actually quite flawed. And you can get better results from driven individuals who identify with the mission. So in hindsight, yeah, I could have left a lot earlier and should have. But it's only now that I've started like reflecting on this and getting that realization.
I'd love to dig into that. The founder CEO is sort of glamorized in a way because they're the original one with the vision and they have this energy which attracts people around them, and they build the culture often around themselves. A culture, at least in the early stages, is often just an extension of the founder, right? And so then replacing them with someone new, there's always this risk that you lose some of the joie de vivre.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. I think there is that. So, you can't incorporate a business, get one client and leave, probably. That won't work. But I do think it's funny because like investors and VCs would often pitch to you when they're trying to get you to take their money. They'll say stuff like, oh, we back the founder all the way. We'll never push you out. We'll always be there to support you. And that seems to have been the mantra for a long time now, founder-friendly VCs, right? What's interesting, though, is now in this economic downturn that's prolonged for quite a while, I'm hearing a lot more chat about VCs starting to try and kick out founders and appoint professional CEOs if the business is looking healthy. And, obviously I can't talk about that in detail, but I know in my network that this is happening. I raise this to just say, like, this whole notion of the founder is the only one that can build and lead a company is a relatively recent phenomenon that we're already seeing the tail end of as a cycle of like general kind of VC and other philosophy. And so my point here is that I just think that this is really up to you. There's no correct answer. Like, you can build a business, you can build 5 businesses at once and only be like semi-involved in them and still be very successful. Hint who I'm talking about, right? Like, it is possible, and many like some of the most successful entrepreneurs in the world do that. So I think it's more flexible than one thinks is my read.
And I've heard that the old model of VC was like they quite happily would kick out a founder
Exactly.
if they're underperforming, or if they just think a quote unquote professional CEO would do it better. So then how do you think about who becomes CEO of Pave?
I mean, that was a really difficult one. And I think I thought about it a lot and thought about whether to hire someone externally. Thought about like what kind of person that would need to be, and spoke to a couple of people who had done that. We actually ended up promoting someone internally. And I'm actually really happy that this happened because, and I think sometimes you don't have that choice. But in our case, what I cared about most was that, they have a track record demonstrating that they can lead, a team through ambiguity, adversity, and show results. And luckily enough, we had someone who joined us over the last year who really demonstrated this and gave me conviction that they were able to sort of show results. And that was a godsend, right? Because you've already got the team bought into this person's track record, and I interviewed a lot of the team as well. I don't think they were aware that I was interviewing them, but I was kind of like asking them, what do you think about this person? And all of them were like, she's amazing. I'm just really worried she's going to burn out because she's working so hard. And I was like, damn, this is good. This is good news. You know, like obviously don't want them to burn out, but point being, like, the team respected their kind of graft and the decisions they were making. So that fell into my lap, honestly. Got really lucky there. It could have been much harder to source and find someone. But I think like that was the process. What I cared about, ultimately was, track record with the team, or like leading teams through adversity, drive. And I think the last thing that I haven't touched on yet, but I do think is also important, is like, this person has to see this as a growth opportunity, that fits with what they want. And I think if we'd hired someone who'd kind of been there, done that, to come into our business, it would have been a lot harder to get them pumped and motivated. But what I like about this particular individual is I think also for them, this is going to be a serious challenge. And I think they're going to smash it. But there is that element of, I'm sure they're feeling a bit like, okay, this is going to be, yeah. And that's good. That's when I think people perform at their best. So as long as they feel supported. Yeah.
And so what will your involvement in PAVE be?
I'll be on the board. And so again, supporting this individual from a much more sort of distant place, but still involved in, I won't say day to day, but month to month. And I'll be just overseeing stuff from that kind of level, which is actually, really exciting.
Yeah.
There's something about transitioning from an operating role to a advisory role where I've already noticed that, like, the quality of what I can bring has improved massively, weirdly, like, because you just see everything from a much more, not quite third party, but a perspective that you normally don't have because you're so in the weeds, but you have intimate knowledge of the weeds. So you're able to provide really good advice, I think. Well, it sounds like whatever, but maybe I'm able to provide better advice. But I do think, I feel like I'm delivering more value already, which is nice.
It's the definition of working on the business rather than in the business, right?
Yeah.
You're forcing yourself to not be able to be in the business. So
exactly.
You can literally only look at it from a bird's eye view.
I think that's right. And I'm also obviously having to delegate more, which I never did as a founder. Now that I'm kind of feeling burnt out from that whole journey after 7 years, plus I'm obviously not, I still am CEO, but shortly won't be. It's nice to have that kind of concrete deadline to be like, okay, well, I literally can't do this anymore. I have to give it to someone. That's been terrific as well. And it's really helped me learn how to delegate too. Yeah.
I am terrible at delegating.
Yeah, it's tough.
Please share any sort of lessons.
I can't say what to do because I didn't do it. I can say what not to do, which is,
perfect.
I definitely got to the point, I haven't really talked about this publicly, but about year 5, I would say I was by then fully burnt out. And it wasn't just work. Tough stuff happened at work, like our growth stopped all of a sudden because of certain advertising platform changes that occurred. And but at the same time, or a very similar time, some really difficult things happened in my life personally, and they all kind of came at once. And so at that point, I was already very, very burnt out, and it just kept getting worse for about 2 years. And I think I've only just started to come out of this phase in the last 2 or 3 months. So it's quite recent. I think what happened was I ended up getting so like burnt out that you just can't work. And as a result, you have to delegate because otherwise nothing gets done. So don't do that.
That's another forcing function.
Yeah, it was. I think I really, I mean, like I lacked courage to kind of figure that out, and I regret that. But at the same time, I am also trying to be kind to myself and say, like, it's understandable that I got to that point.
Can you just describe what burnout is and
What it
feels
is?
like? Because I feel like it's this term that's thrown around a lot, and it's kind of different per person. Like, what does it mean to you?
I can talk about it from a kind of concept point of view, and then what it feels like day to day, at least for me. I think from a concept point of view, I think it's the feeling that nothing you do is contributing to something that is tactile or meaningful. So you feel essentially not in control of your day to day. That's like the best way that I've, having done some reading on this, heard it described that, well, at least it resonates with me the most. It's this feeling of like powerlessness, which, obviously as an entrepreneur hits you very hard because, you're deliberately not in a corporate role because you hate having to push paper around that doesn't mean anything, right? That's how I describe it. And that's like, at least how I see it. The way it feels for me towards like its peak was just like, well, general depression, right? Like proper depression where you're like unable to, well, you can think, you're always thinking, but you're just like incapable of moving much or kind of stuck on the couch for weekends or evenings. That was a big part of it for me. Another part of it would be like your energy goes. So I think at the worst moments, I could work maybe 3 half days a week. And then the rest of it, I can do work, but I'm just not operating at a sort of level that I have to fulfill all the duties that I would need to do, or at least to a satisfactory extent, according to my standards. And so that's how it manifested for me, at least. And I'm sure there are many other things that I'm forgetting, but it's interesting how your brain tries to forget, right? It's all like a little bit foggy. But yeah, that's how I would say conceptually and in practice it felt.
Yeah, I remember seeing you at, I think it was Sifted.
Oh, yeah.
Maybe 2 years ago.
2022, yeah.
And you were like, it's not good.
That was a bad time, yeah.
I'm not in a good place.
Yeah.
And it felt like the personal stuff on top of the work stuff like was super heavy. Just looking at you, like we didn't even go into any sort of depth at all because we then had Forest later.
Oh yeah.
And
gosh, yeah, we did.
Yeah, it feels like as a founder we're running at a very high rate. Like we're going at 90, 100% a lot of the time. And therefore there's not a lot of space for anything else in life to then wobble. And when it does, it all comes crashing down.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think, well, first of all, let's say like there's different buckets of needs that have to be met. And as I can't remember, I think it was Ben Gately maybe that described it to me, but like you have your work bucket, you have your relationship bucket, you have your family, and you have your kind of personal. And it might not be quite right, but anyway, you can only really focus on 2 at once, which I'm not sure now I agree with, but I think it's a useful model to basically reinforce the point that there's finite resource. What's interesting though, I think, at least for me, and it's a topic that I have to be careful of, is I will almost never focus on the me bucket. And I'll usually be focused on like work or family or work and relationships. And so when, some of the other stuff gets worse or even tougher, the point I wanted to make is just like often as a founder, you'll not focus on you. And you're already kind of having to sacrifice everything and not really spend too much time on yourself. And it can just like, that can compound and get really bad. And I think that's where I got to. And it's a really dark place. And I don't recommend it. Yeah, but I'm really happy that I've also gone through that because I have a much more heightened like awareness of where not to get to. But yeah, it's all part of the journey.
So what does focusing on you look like?
And to be honest, I don't know yet because it's been so long that I haven't really done that. One is to like really reflect on what you're doing more purposefully. The thing about building a company is that it's obviously really hard to get to product market fit or build anything in the first place without a privileged insight that has come from years of working in a particular field where you're confident that this is definitely going to be a business. If you're someone in that position and lucky enough to be in that position, then great. I think you can actually shortcut a lot of the things I'm about to say. But in my case, I was a generalist consultant before going into tech and didn't have a privileged insight and wandered around turning stones over and over to find something that I thought was going to work or hopefully would work. And eventually we did, and that was great. But in the process, I think I tried to keep myself true to like a mission and what I wanted to do. But through iteration, you often digress from that. And so going back to that point, it's hard enough already to find an idea that works. And often by the time you found something that works, it can be like completely divorced from what you originally wanted to do. And this is a bit of a sort of tricky situation to be in as a founder, because it means you're kind of doing it now because you found something that works, but not because you originally wanted to do it. And in my case, it wasn't quite that hard, like stark. Some of the stuff we do around financial inclusion is super cool. And that's always what I've wanted to do. But is it exactly what I thought it was going to be? No. And that's actually a really important insight. So now, as a second, or hopefully in the future, third or fourth time founder, the thing I'll be thinking about a lot more, tying it back to like personal needs, is this an idea that I genuinely care about? And I only recently started thinking about this one, but is it an idea that's going to have customers who I care about, which I think is super important too, because you're going to spend a lot of time with them. And I think if you're able to fulfill those things, you can automatically fulfill your own needs. And when that sweet spot happens, I think you can see it in a founder. They look like, Buddha, basically, right? They're just like so enlightened and charismatic. But I would just say, like, that is hard. That doesn't happen. Like, getting a business to work is hard enough. Getting that to match with your personal mission and vision and identity is even harder. And that's, assuming you even know what your personal identity and mission and vision are in the first place. So I really think like being an entrepreneur is tough. Yeah.
And it all gets blurred and muddled, and we convince ourselves that because this idea is successful and because we've raised lots of money and we have a team that believe in us, then actually this must be the thing. And like, yeah, I'm excited about this thing. But then actually, if you strip away like all the veneer and really get down to being honest with ourselves, like how much of it do we actually love?
Yeah.
So while I was running Founders, I ran, it's still incorporated, but it doesn't do this anymore. But I ran a company called Click, and we ran virtual workshops for large corporate teams to help them better connect.
Yeah, I remember this. Yeah.
And as per your point to loving the customers that you do it for, I had founders on one side and basically Bank of New York Mellon employees on the other. And I just deeply love founders, entrepreneurs, like people like yourself, everyone else in founders. They're just like such magical, deep, such incredible people. And I'm not saying that Bank of New York Mellon employees aren't lovely as well, but there just isn't that same spark for me. And it was just like night and day. And I could tell that one was just like, I really wanted to pour all my energy into it. And the other, I was like, it's making loads of money. It's like 85% margins, but like, I just don't care.
Yeah.
Like, I'm literally like, it's really pushing this boulder uphill, getting this thing going. And I could just see that my motivation wasn't there. And I wish I'd found someone else to take it over like earlier, because I'm sure it would have been really successful, but I didn't. And now it's a bit nascent. So that is what it is.
Yeah.
So what process have you now gone through with understanding this personal mission and drive from Pave now moving into Fuse? Because also I imagine that's still quite blurred. Like you started building Fuse within Pave, and they're in a similar space. Fuse is B2B, Pave is B2C. Like what's been the tweak of, Pave wasn't scratching this itch of mine, but Fuse now is?
Well, I don't claim that I've got that aligned, to be clear. Yeah. And I would say like Pave, I mean, the mission I still really like, right? What we do is help people get access to financial products and in a kind of safer way than is available today. And I think that's a great mission. I think a lot of my kind of burnout with that idea came from just too much time spent on it as well, right? Trying so many things and not having them work because of various reasons. And sometimes work, of course, as well. But after a while, you do get a bit like, oh, fuck, I've thought about this, day and night, right? For 7 years. And you're like, I don't want to think about it anymore. Fair enough.
So fair enough.
And Fuse, I think what I'm doing differently this time is I'm keeping a really open mind and not like pinning myself to a particular iteration of that company too early. And I mean, what we do again is in finance, and it's about like automating like workflow for various businesses in finance, which sounds super boring. And yeah, it is, but there is a lot of like problems and cash to be made there. I'm making sure while I approach this that point earlier of like, do I like the customer? Do I find the problem interesting at the very least and engaging? And I guess the third thing is I'm also being aware that that interest may not be forever, and that's okay. Like that's normal as a founder. And maybe in fact, like what for me is more suitable is a portfolio of different companies, right? Like being that open-minded about the approach, and going back to what we talked about at the start, like not being tied to this notion that if you're in as a founder, you're in for 10 years, which I think is just fucking dumb. It's not true. That's what I'm trying to do. I don't have the answer, but it's more of a mindset thing.
I really like that. And there seem to be these more portfolio entrepreneurs or people like becoming wise to this now, like this whole veneer of like, this is what a founder is. And if you're bought in, then that's what you have to, that's the box you have to fit into.
I think it's very like dangerous talk actually. And it's dangerous because, you know, obviously I came out of that kind of narrative on, I think, the wrong side, unfortunately, where I just felt this sense of commitment at the expense of my own needs for too long. Because I thought, shit, if I resign, this is a big problem. But it's kind of a made up mantra, right? And again, going back to that point, it is even the people that are kind of enforcing this narrative go through cycles of making up their own mind and saying the opposite, or doing the opposite. And so it's like anything, it's a narrative with economic and social cycles. But I think, yeah, it's a dangerous one, right? Because ultimately it boils down to like, it has a huge impact on human happiness. And I think you have to be quite careful about that. And anyway, I learned that lesson, and that's great. Yeah.
One thing I read not too long ago was Jim Collins' book called Good to Great. Have you read it?
I've heard of it. I don't think I've read it.
One of the ideas that he talks about in this book, like, hit me like a train, which was, as per your point with like, when you start a company, you have this idea that you really love, but then in order for that to be a business that actually works, it usually iterates away from that original idea.
Right.
And then by the time it's a business that works, it's like your idea is way over there and this is the new business.
Oh, interesting. They talk about that. Cool.
So they talk about it, but more so than thinking back to the start.
Yeah.
Where we don't want to get married to this one idea. And so therefore we assume the idea is going to change. Therefore, what else can we actually become more attached to, which is therefore the team. And so it's almost
interesting.
Find the people that you most want to work with.
Yeah, that's smart. Yeah.
And then build the idea and vision together. He describes it like a bus. He says, get people on the bus first before setting the direction of the bus, because the direction of the bus is inevitably going to change. And so if you can get people on the bus because of the other people that are there, then they're less likely to be fickle and go and leave the company as and when the direction inevitably changes, which I found like really difficult to conceptualize, because I love coming up with ideas and being like, oh my God, this is such a great idea. Like, I've got it. I found this like spark, this like beaming light.
Yeah.
And now I've been like, okay, I want to try and let go of that and like not get too married to anything, but actually, just sit with a space. Like, I like this space. Like, connecting people is my space, which I adore, and I believe I'll build in this for a long time. Now I'm like, okay, I need to think more about just like, who are the like world-class operators that I want to work with? Who out of my network have I met so far that I think like, cool, can I pull them together and motivate these people to come up with an idea together in this space? Because then also, if it's everyone's idea, everyone's more bought in, right? And so there are so many benefits to this.
Yeah, it's super interesting. I think it for me, it kind of goes back to that. What you said links to the whole like needs point, and ultimately it's, are you fulfilling your needs somehow? Whatever the idea is, like maybe you have an idea that frankly you don't care about in terms of the impact it's having. Maybe you don't like the customers either. But if you're happy in other parts of your life, that is probably going to be okay. Like, you will still work through it and be a happy person. You know, ideally, of course, all those things match up and you get into that kind of nirvana zone, but I don't think it's often possible. In reality, it is you piece those things together to make it work. And certainly I agree with that point where you can often be a founder with no idea, but a great team who is motivated to try and figure it out. And to be honest, that's what happened with us. Like I had loads of shitty ideas being a kind of non-entrepreneur and going into entrepreneurship that didn't work, and got the team to work on them. But ultimately we hired some extremely talented people who are like now, they've left us now, but are very senior at like very big organizations because they're very smart. And they really helped us find product market fit, right? And so I certainly have benefited from, that whole bus analogy. Yeah, it definitely was what worked for us in the end, or rather at the start, I should say.
So then, speaking of the team, let's talk about Chris. And so Chris is in Founders as well, Chris Butcher.
Yeah.
You guys met at EF. He was the CTO to your CEO. And you guys built Pave for how many years together?
Gosh, 4, I think. Or maybe, 4. Because he would have left in 2021. Yeah, 2021 he left, yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
Wow. That's a good long marriage.
Yeah, I should just start by saying, like, we're still friends, right? And I see him, like, a lot of weekends. I haven't seen him in a while, actually, but he's not in the country right now. But I mean, we're very, very close and still am. He's one of my closest friends. And I think we were very lucky that we were able to do that. And I think in large part, it was, him and our relationship that was special enough to make that work. I think often it isn't the case. So, I mean, what happened there was that, we founded the business together out of an incubator. And then that was the first time we'd met. We didn't know each other before then. So when we incorporated in May 2017, I'd known him for maybe 4 weeks. And we were on the company's house as directors. And so you're a bit like, fuck, is this going to work? Yeah. And
It's
then
like Married at First Sight.
It really was. And we just had this really good chemistry. Like he is the most like bullish, to the point, doesn't give a fuck about what other people think type, as you can tell, right? And well, at least on the surface, he has a lot more depth than that. That's obviously I'm summarizing a lot here, and is an incredible engineer. And I, on the other hand, I'm not an engineer, but I love the land of strategy and fundraising and narrative and storytelling and all this. So we worked really well as a team, and that dynamic was very productive. And I think what I respect Chris about is actually, one of the things I think about a lot is he's good at prioritizing his needs. Like the guy is exceptional at noticing when something isn't working for him and doing something about it very, very quickly, whether that's like a conflict situation at work or our relationship or something like that. And I say that because that's what ultimately made him raise the point that he wasn't happy in the setup that we had anymore. And he did that about 6 months or 7 months before he actually decided to leave, or like we agreed that he could leave the business. So in 2020 at some point. And he broke that really gently with me. And I think at that stage, our relationship was quite frayed as well. So it didn't really come as a surprise to me either. And then we kind of amicably worked through the next 6 months, figuring out a good transition plan. And then he exited, and that was that. And so it went really, really well. Yeah. I think the difficult parts like are around what happens to equity and this kind of stuff. But again, I think everyone was very reasonable in this situation, and we didn't have anything kind of ugly or difficult that came up. So yeah, I think our story was probably atypical. I'm not sure. Yeah.
It sounds pretty dreamlike. Was it something about your relationship or the business that didn't align
made it
with
frayed
him?
it?
Can we go into a little bit more detail?
Yeah, for sure. I remember, and I think obviously I'd want him to say what he has to say to make this most accurate. But my understanding was like, after a while, when you're working as an engineer in particular, and you're building stuff every day, and then you're testing it in front of a user, it doesn't work, and you're scrapping that entire code base, or taking only parts of it and having to rebuild again, that iteration cycle gets extremely taxing because, it's that feeling of burnout, right? Going back to it. Do you feel in control of your work? And are your outputs contributing to something concrete? What I just described sounds like no and no, right? And so if you do that over a prolonged period of time, anyone will get checked out. And so I think that ultimately led him to realize like he was not enjoying it anymore. I also think that deep down underneath, he's now a CEO, right? And has raised money with some terrific VCs and has his own company. I wonder if he also was like, you know what, maybe I can do this too, and wanted to go and try that out. That part is speculation. But so I think there were both like negative and positive factors that influenced kind of his desire to stay. And of course, I wasn't exactly doing 100% like superbly either. And so when you've got two founders in that state, your relationship will fray naturally. And you'll start like seeing the negatives more and thinking like, is it because of me, or is it because of us, or is it because of them? And that can end up in a bit of a spiral. But again, like what was special about our relationship was he was the one able to raise that sort of tension and conflict and surface it very early and force us to talk about it. And I think that helped a ton in making it super amicable.
And do you have any co-founders going to Fuse?
Yeah, so Oscar, who isn't part of Founders, although I will nominate him if I can. No, I'm not allowed to, am I? But let's see. So he and I've known him since week one of university. So
wow. Yeah,
he's this kind of tall dude who has a very loud voice. And we were like Freshers Week.
Co-founder material.
I know, that's all I care about now. It was like Freshers Week. And I remember going into this bar crawl, like bar 7 or 8, whatever, and just hearing this booming voice and being like, who the fuck is that? And it was just this guy, and he was like shouting super loud and getting people to do shots or whatever. And it's weird because he's actually often quite introverted, but when he goes out, he turns into this like beast mode. And yeah, since then I've been like, this guy's cool. And we've remained friends since. He joined Pave 1 year in. So he's been around for 6 years as well. So wow. Really, we worked together for 6 years, 5-6 years. And he and I are now co-founders of Fuse, and we're going to be, building that out. And actually, I'm not allowed to say this next part, so I can't. But anyway, we're going to the US to build part of it, which will be pretty cool. Yeah, it's I guess this one is almost the opposite of Chris in the sense that like I've known this guy for 15 years, so coming at it from very different foundations, but. That doesn't mean necessarily that, is the relationship better or worse? No, I think it ultimately depends on how you are operating day to day. And we have our issues too, and we're working through them. But yeah, different setup this time. It's the more classic, like very investable story, right? University
for 6 years,
university mates. Yeah, there's almost zero founder risk, right? If I were evaluating us as an asset, I'd be like, yeah, this is founder, no problem. Yeah. Product market fit. That's where I'd be looking at. Instead of this, yeah.
But nonetheless, I suppose you're still taking lessons from your and Chris's relationship,
right?
Communication.
It absolutely, and what I try to emulate is this whole conflict surfacing point. People refer to it in different ways. It's like I think Ben Horowitz talks about it as sharpening contradictions, and then. I was going to try and look smart and refer to like 2 or 3 more authors, but I can't because I don't remember any. But anyway,
we talk about sharpening contradictions.
I think it's just the idea that if you feel like there's tension or a contradiction between someone or 2 ideas or whatever, then you gotta sharpen them in the sense that like you gotta bring them out very quickly. Now I could have misinterpreted what he was trying to say, but that's how at least I took it, and I think it's been great for me because. Funnily enough, I was describing this to someone else yesterday morning who's thinking of being an entrepreneur. And I think I told them, like, in my opinion, one of the biggest like success factors for a founder is you can measure it by the time they spend between sensing something is off and acting on it. And the shorter that delay, usually the better the founder. Because some people will like stew on stuff for 2 weeks if they think an employee is underperforming, or if they think like a particular particular contract might be at risk, or if they think that a particular product strategy isn't working even though people are already building it. I think the faster you can address that, the better you are. But that takes courage, right? And so I think about that a lot, and that's something I'm trying to bring into this current and new relationship to tell myself, like, okay, is there tension? And if so, when am I going to talk to them about it? Like, ideally now, that I think is one of the biggest lessons I've taken.
Sounds like a very intuitive feeling as well.
Yeah, I mean, if you apply it to other domains that everyone, well, most people will have experienced, like you think about it in terms of just general relationships with people, those friends that come up to you and like air the room and say, "What's up? I think you're really angry at me." Those are the friends you trust because they're not hiding anything up their sleeve. It's all there, right? I think the same applies to business partners as well.
It's that leaning into short run pain, long run gain.
Yeah, yeah.
And so then that element of trust is so crucial to connecting with any relationship, be it your partner, be it your co-founder and employees. And then I suppose it has to be a core tenet of culture in general. So how does that extrapolate out? How do you build that trust within the company wide? How do you encourage people to be super open and honest in the times where it's most uncomfortable?
Yeah, it's tough. I think we're really good at being, and I base this off of like exit interviews and surveys and general discussions with the team. But as a company, we're really good at being super transparent, and that comes naturally to me because I like to share the burden a little bit, and I think sharing bad news, sharing our financial situation, or sharing good news, all these things add towards building a transparent culture. So, the other day we had to let a bunch of people go, which sucked, and it's hopefully the last time for a while. But off the back of that, we did a internal discussion, which there was about a 4-page document listing out all of the intricacies of our financial situation and all of the modeling and assumptions that went into it. And every single person could access and comment on it. And everyone saw exactly when we were going to run out of money, why, and what the drivers were, what we could do about it, and when we need to hit particular growth numbers by to not make that happen. And that's quite, I think, unusual. A lot of people will not share that information, or at least that's what I hear from our current employees who have worked at other businesses where this has happened. They'll be told last minute that we're running out of money and we're firing everyone. So one thing we do quite differently is that we will share everything. Obviously, some things we don't share. Like, for example, I know some companies do this. We don't share salaries, and maybe we should. To be honest, I haven't really thought about it enough to have a point on that. But I'm just going to say we're not like radically transparent. But I think in general there is that sense. I made a big point of that because I think that's a really good foundation of trust, for sure. The harder part, though, is even if you do that, you can still have trouble getting people to have tough conversations because that's not the same thing. Like being transparent is actually quite easy, right? It's just talking. Yes, at the risk of freaking people out, but if anything, you're sharing the burden, right? And usually someone who joins a startup as an early stage employee likes risk and doesn't mind that you only have 3 months runway and there's no chance you're going to be able to raise. They're cool with that, right? I think it is much harder, and this is where I have to like actively make an effort to work. It's much harder to encourage people to ask difficult questions or address conflict directly with someone without stewing on it, and holding them accountable to doing so. And one way you can do that, of course, is to celebrate when people do these things publicly. It's to hold them accountable to doing them in your one-on-ones. Like if 2 employees are having a feud and one employee tells you about it, you force that first employee to talk to that person by Monday or whatever. But I think the best way to do it is to practice it yourself. And so in those conversations with your employees, being very direct about your expectations and feedback to them, and you have to do that. And actually, that's really hard. I find it very hard. I think a lot of people do, and I don't do it perfectly and consistently, and I have to make a deliberate effort 7 years in. So this isn't going to change for me, and I know that now. every time I have to make a constant effort. But yeah, those are the things that I think, that side of it, I find it much harder. That and hiring people who have drive are the three tenets of what I think are a good culture: transparency, direct, tough conversation, forcing, and having people who are super motivated. And if you have those things, I think you get a lot done. Yeah.
That's really powerful. Double clicking on the having tough conversations, one way to encourage it is celebrate it when people have a tough conversation. That sounds like a very difficult landscape to navigate.
Obviously, it's not like employee A told employee B to go fuck themselves because they were,
Well done.
well done.
Well done.
Fucking great job. No, although that would be quite funny. I wonder. Actually, imagine a Slack bot that did that for you. That could be super interesting. What I mean is, so for example, I've got I usually don't have concrete examples, but I do today. That document that we shared around the finances in detail, one of our engineers, who shall not be named, was like, immediately in the team meeting, he was like, okay, you've told us, we've just had to do redundancies. You're showing us this document. Like, what's the probability that you're going to do redundancies again in the next month? Which I thought was like quite a brave question to ask, right, in front of the whole team. And it's at those moments where you have to say, terrific question. I'm sure that wasn't easy to ask. Thank you for doing it. Good job. And really fucking bat that point home. So that's one example. And I just think in general, whenever someone asks like a contrarian or a question that is probably on everyone's minds, but not everyone has the courage to ask it, you have to like shout out to them and say, terrific, please, more of those. Yeah, it's whenever those questions that give you like fucking anxiety as a CEO, you have to make a point to say, good job. Like, thank you for doing that, because who else is going to do it, right?
That's super tough as well. But I suppose luckily that in that situation, you had a strong answer, which was, we're not doing any more redundancies in the next month. And so from that position of comfort, they're like, oh, we've got the answer that you guys all want. That then I suppose you're more comfortable to be like, great question, well done.
I think so. But it also links to the transparency point, because in this document, nowhere was I hiding any information, right? It was very clearly laid out to them that we're going to run out of money again in X months amount of time. And if we don't perform this much by then, the business is in a bit of a pickle. It was all listed there. And what they were asking was, okay, well, have you really listed everything? And I was affirming that, yes, I have, right? So it goes in hand with this transparency and tough questions point. If you're not transparent, but forcing people to ask tough questions, then I think you have a difficult situation on your hands, but it's very kind of, self-made and your fault, right? So I think they kind of counterbalance each other, right?
So then once you've made redundancies, it obviously it's a hit to everyone else left in the business.
Yeah.
Like, I'm sure it'll be a hit when you and Oscar leave.
I don't know. Sorry, yeah.
It will definitely be a massive hit. You'll be leaving a gaping hole. How do you cement culture in those moments?
Oh, it's a good question. I don't actually know. Well, I think you have to be very careful about the people that are in the business and taking it on. And again, being consistent about the expectations that you have for each of them, and making it clear that, you leaving doesn't mean expectations change. I'm trying to be a bit careful about this one, because me leaving is, I think, going to be the best thing for the company and shareholders and everything. And I genuinely believe that. Going back to the point of like, am I the best leader right now for this particular company, given my motivations levels? Probably not. So that means I also need to like fully let go and let the people who remain shape and form whatever remains in the way that they see fit. Because I won't have the energy or time to try and enforce the culture that I created. So I think that's quite important. I really think, like, when people were talking about massive CEO transitions at places like Apple or Berkshire Hathaway, where it's coming up as well, I think they're asking the wrong question. It's not, how are you going to maintain Buffett's culture of value-based investing? The right question to ask is, who is the next person and what culture do they have or what vision do they have for the culture. That's kind of how I see it. Because like, of course, Buffett can't enforce shit from the grave. Like it's not going to work. So yeah, that's how I see it, frankly. So I guess my shorter answer to your question is I don't think it's really on me, and that's okay. That's great. Yeah, it's great for me. It's great for them.
I'm assuming some things obviously still stay constant. The values are probably still there. The mission/vision is probably still there. But I remember reading in one of your previous interviews that you get the entire team to revisit your company vision and mission semi-regularly.
Once in a while, yeah.
Once in a while.
Yeah.
I'm assuming in those conversations, the vision and mission evolves slightly. You iterate on it in some way, maybe not too much. It's one of those things that's sort of the bedrock and the foundation, so
yeah,
it doesn't change too much. But can you speak more to that?
Well, I think the first thing to note is that like mission, vision, purpose setting, it's quite. My honest opinion is it's quite nebulous. Everyone has a different definition of mission, vision, and purpose. There's some good frameworks around it, like the NASA model. But have I found something that I like? No, frankly. I think all of them are a bit too complicated. And so my preference now, having done this, is like for a bit, is just to keep it really simple and say, ultimately what we care about is improving credit scores for people or whatever, like keeping it super simple. So I know in past interviews, I've talked about like iterating on these concepts. And I think it's really useful to do that from a team buy-in creation perspective. But I think you can really overdo mission, vision, purpose stuff if you're like too early stage or if you're iterating it too often. So just to say, like, this is an area I'm still grappling with. I'm still trying to figure it out for myself. But ultimately, I think simple is better. In terms of what the team are going to do when I step down, again, it's up to them. Yeah, sure. That's how I see it. And of course, like if as a board member, if they all of a sudden say, actually, we're going to go mine uranium instead of improve someone's credit health, then I'd be like, no. But it doesn't really. It's okay if it's
the world really needs more uranium.
Oh, apparently we do. So maybe they should, but and I don't think you can.
When is too early?
We fucked this up so much. We talked about how some people are lucky; they have a privileged insight into an industry, and it's a viable business. They jump in and it works quite early on. Although again, that's extremely rare, I think, and most people struggle and find stuff through iteration. So for the majority of us who are in that iteration portion of startup founders, you can really shoot yourself in the foot. And frankly, I blame a few of our investors for this, but they would, no hard feelings. Like I get why they did it. They would set us up with some consultants, and we'd do like workshops on what the company mission might be. And those workshops were amazing. Don't get me wrong. I loved them. They were really well run, and they're done by people I respect and adore. But we didn't know what we were doing, right? We didn't have product market fit. So how do I know like what our 10-year, 5-year goal is going to be when we don't even know what the fuck we're? That's the risk. And by the way, a lot of people disagree with me on this point when I've talked about it. But my opinion is why like waste time talking about that? Just hire people who have shared values with you, going back to your bus analogy, I think, and get them on board, find something that works, and then define the mission and vision. That to me feels fine. Like, why over-engineer this process? The objection I get to that is like, well, how do you bring people on board the journey early on if you don't have a mission and vision? And I get that pushback, but like for us, that was never really an issue. Like broadly speaking, we knew we wanted to do something for financial inclusion. What exactly? No clue. But good enough. Let's go. And I think most people will be okay with that. And if they're not, fine, go work somewhere else. That's okay too.
So what do they buy into then?
I think they ultimately buy into the sense of adventure, right? And the people and the culture. So, and to construct those things, you don't necessarily need a mission and vision early on. I remember reading, I can't remember who it was, but I think they had a fantastic hiring page, and they made it very clear on their website. They were like, look, we're pre-product market fit. We have no idea what we're going to build. And we therefore need a special type of person who is okay with that to be on this early journey with us. There's going to be a lot of failed projects, a lot of iteration, a lot of hair pulling. If that's not for you, don't join us. And I thought, like, damn, my next company, that is exactly what it's going to say. That's fantastic, right? You've got such good alignment there. And that on its own feels like a mission. It's like, we're going to be a pack of like raggedy, scrappy founder, early stage employees trying to find something that has a good impact on the world. I would sign up to that. That sounds fun.
It's almost summarizing sort of the infinite game of startups, where the finite game is our mission is to change the lives of this many people in this space, solving this problem. And you iterate on that, and eventually, like, maybe that blurs or it fades, or it's just that's no longer the exact mission. And that's sort of finite. Whereas the infinite game is like, we're going to experiment until we get something right. And then when we get something right, then we're going to learn how to build a machine to scale that thing.
Yeah. I think it's just a difference between, well, one is slightly more pragmatic than the other. And yeah, you can do it another way as well. I think some people, like, I know Musk starts with a mission, right? And then he builds a company. And the mission will be like, make humans interplanetary or whatever. Yeah. And then you figure out what you're going to do based on that mission. And that's clearly worked very well for them. But some people, like myself, won't start thinking that big, or don't have the skills or resources to mobilize. And that's fine too. Like, some people need to find product market fit before they can pitch an idea. And so, yeah, I think it really just depends what kind of founder you are. And I'm very comfortable with my method. It works. It's worked. So that's fine.
So then, just touching on this amazing team, you hired some incredible people early on. How did you approach that? How do you go about finding these people?
Yeah.
How do you go about bringing them on board? Like, just, yeah, I would love to touch on that.
I mean, some of it was hustle, some of it was luck. I think a few of our like best hire, obviously like Oscar, I knew from university, and so that was a cheat code. And then a couple of other people, one of them just fell in our lap. They were at, and we're still like super close friends, but he was at one of our parties, Series A party or something like that, and we stayed in touch.
Sorry, a Series A party? As in your investors have a party for all their Series A founders?
Oh, no. When we raised money, when we did our Series A, we threw a party, and
Gotcha.
this guy happened to be there. We stayed in touch, and then we ended up like hiring them because,
Amazing.
yeah, and we're still super close.
Getting them bought into the mission of you throw really good parties.
Well, but like the point is, it's culture, right? It's like,
Yeah.
these people take themselves too seriously, and yeah, I can't comment on the stuff that happened in detail at that party, but it was a fun night.
That just piques my interest.
Okay, I had no comment, but it was great. And I think, then you get a sense of whether you're a good cultural fit or not. And we're still really close friends. Had him for dinner last weekend, actually. So those were quite lucky. One of the best other hires I made was, that was definitely like hustle, cold outbounding someone who I thought looked like the shit, right? And like the best you could get for the particular role we were looking for. And they were graceful, lucky. I don't know what's, kind enough, I guess, to have a meeting. And from there, I went into sell mode and was like, this is what we're building. Can you come and do it with us? And eventually managed to convince them. And so that was more a sell. So it depends, I think. It depends. But I really think what people don't do enough is outbound top like potential employees directly with personal messages as a founder. Like, you get recruiters doing that all the time. I think the best founders are the ones that will pick the people that they want and go after them relentlessly. Yeah, and that has to be part of building a good team. Otherwise, it just won't. The good people are in the best roles already, right? So
Takes a lot to pull them away, so you have to give it everything, right?
yeah, that's right.
And I suppose the more you hustle, the more luck you engineer in a way.
Yeah, it's about how many innings do you bat. It's about showing up, and it's about how many of those personalized emails do you send, and that's ultimately will make a difference. And I sent a lot. I remember sending tons for this hire, and it worked out. Yeah, because actually that's the person that helped us find product market fit. And without them, we wouldn't be here. So, yeah, it does matter.
We've spoken a lot about product market fit. Is that something that you feel people would define differently depending on the company, or is that something that's quite clearly defined and everyone sort of agrees to its terminology?
I think there's different degrees of strength to product market fit. Some people, but like, opinions vary. Like Y Combinator will have a very strict definition of it and a very high standard for this, where they'll say you will notice when it happens. People will pull the product out of your hand. You won't be able to supply inventory fast enough to fulfill orders. And you'll generally feel like going from pushing a boulder up a hill to, you're trying to desperately cling on to this rocket ship. Now, that all sounds like quite stark. I think in reality, in our experience, we definitely reached some form of product market fit where we were, acquiring hundreds of customers profitably every day. And it was like such a buzz coming into work because you just felt like so good. It's an amazing feeling. It's like just constant dopamine. And then, of course, things happen and it doesn't quite work out sometimes. But I don't think, though, even at that peak, I wouldn't describe what we had as like customers pulling the product out of our hands every day. It was not that strong, but it was quite strong. And so I do think it's not as binary as some make it out to be, at least in my experience. But yeah, product market fit feels great, is what I can say. But yeah, there are multiple definitions and strengths to it, is how I see it.
Yeah, and it's a scale, right?
It is a scale, yeah. Sorry, the one thing I was going to add is like product market fit for a venture capital backed business is going to be different in its requirements to product market fit for a sustainable, profit first, debt powered business, right? Like, I think what often when you're in the VC world and startup world too long, you kind of forget that actually the majority of companies in the world are not VC backed. And many of them bootstrap and don't grow as fast. And they might not have this kind of roaring product market fit, tripling revenue every year type growth, but they have 15, 20% growth annually and build incredible businesses. And so that on its own, I think it would be insulting to those founders to say they haven't reached product market fit. They clearly have. It's just that they're growing at a different pace. And I think that's the nuance I'm trying to kind of bring here, where it is a scale depending on how you define it.
And so the obvious differences between those two businesses are VC-backed businesses have a lot more funding to then pump into growth, top of funnel. If you found the thing that works for a certain type of people and you have clarity on that, then if you just raised 5 million quid or 10 million quid or 50 million quid, you can spend so much more on marketing to target those people to then keep the growth going hard and fast. Whereas the bootstrap, like, you just don't have that funding. Is there anything else that separates the two for you?
Actually, to clarify, I think I'm not saying the marketing spend is the differentiating factor, because actually you never should spend on marketing a product. Like, you should only use marketing to sort of accentuate already existing demand. And I think that's very hard to get right, because it's very easy to get addicted to the marketing dopamine, which we did, and it fucked us. My point is, I think there's just like it. Obviously, if you're a VC backable company, you're going to have very strong product market fit. But there are weaker forms of product market fit where the product isn't like so appealing that people tear it out of your hands, but it is still pretty appealing. It just needs a little bit more selling to get there. And I think YC would argue that isn't product market fit, but I'm saying actually I think it is. It's just a weaker form of it, and that is still enough to build a viable business. I don't think to me the money element of how much you've raised and how much you're spending doesn't influence the strength of product market fit. And if you think it does, then you have a problem, because you're relying on marketing dime to sustain your growth.
Really good clarification. Thank you. Really helpful. I'd love to transition on to you.
Oh no, yes.
You as a founder, and then you outside of founder life, because we're not just like companies, not just entrepreneurs. Briefly on this, you have spoken previously about resilience, and you've had a coach, and obviously you've been through the ringer. You've had a really challenging past couple of years. It takes its toll. We've spoken about burnouts. Are there any frameworks that you've learnt from coaching that have really helped you deal with the crap that gets thrown at you as CEO?
I mean, I think the first thing to say is like all this stuff, the earlier you start working on it, the better. And I think I left it a little bit late and reactive and deprioritize my own needs and prioritize everything else. So don't do that would be the first thing. Speaking of techniques and stuff I've learned. So I've had a therapist for a year and a half. Gosh, that goes quick. And I had a coach for about a year prior to that. And I think out of that experience, the things that I've found most useful, as basic as it is, journaling is terrific. Like, it's just so good. Mine is just a Google Doc that says like notes 2024. And it's just this, because I can't be fucked writing in prose. I just have bullet points. Like, that's how basic it is. I won't, sit down and spend time and do it, because if I force myself to do that, I wouldn't do it. And so I guess I'm making this point just to say, like, I found it very difficult to start keeping this habit, like most other habits. And as a consequence, I just made it into a format that I could do it. So I will, be walking down the street and I'll think about, I should write that emotion down, and I'll just put a bullet point in, and it takes 2 seconds and it helps me do it. And I'm not consistent either. It's like I'll have weeks long gaps where I don't write anything, and then I'll have weeks where I write every day because I'm struggling. But I do that. It's helpful for me for sure. I think learning a lot about your kind of brain's anatomy is really useful. That was something my coach helped me with, and just learning about the sort of the primal part of the brain, the sort of more human side of the brain, and how we are wired to react to things primarily before we process stuff as a rational human, and how it's inevitable that we get emotional first before we're able to control things. Knowing the sort of structural limitations of how your mind is made, it makes everything understandable, and all of a sudden you don't blame yourself for being so reactive to things. And knowing that was very useful for me. And I know I'm being quite vague here, but just to cover off that point. And
can you give us an example of something you've journaled on recently?
Yeah, sure. Well, before coming here, I had therapy, so it's been a day of talking a lot. Sorry.
I love it.
I feel really fucking cringe. Anyway, also, by the way, you have like this great, like, little, sorry for listeners out there, this might not be interesting, but you have this amazing wall where really cool cats keep walking by. It's just wonderful to see them all. And I keep getting...
highway.
It's great. You have a cat highway. It's fantastic. I've seen like at least 4 or 5 different ones.
And a fox and squirrels. And
that's amazing.
Everything.
That's so good. Anyhow, what did I write about? I wrote about, God, this goes a bit deep, but I guess you asked about the personal section. So one of the things that I wrote was this insight that I had where, I grew up in Japan with a British mother and Japanese dad, and therefore, and Japan is very monocultural still. And as a consequence, when you're half Caucasian, you feel that you were half Caucasian, because you don't look the same. And you get singled out for that quality for both good and bad reasons while growing up. Now, that has meant that over the course of my life, those two identities have been at the forefront of my kind of psychological self and identity. And it's taken up a lot of space. And today, kind of talking to my therapist, sorry, this sounds really like a bit
really interesting.
Okay. Talking to him, he made me realize, like, you've probably thought about that more than the average person. And it's probably also come at the expense of prioritizing your own needs. Because if you're constantly thinking about what does it mean to be Japanese? What does it mean to be British? How do I operate in the correct format? You're not listening to, you're not asking the question, what do you need? How do you want to operate? What do you want to do? And so that was quite a big insight today. And by the way, normally it's not like that grandiose, right? What I write in my notes, but coincidentally, today's one was pretty good. And I think, so I wrote that down. And as an implication of that, I was thinking to myself, well, this is probably why I have to be careful as a founder, because I will have a tendency to try and do what I think is right as a founder, but not as Sho. So it's those kind of insights that I think I find most noteworthy and will record. Yeah.
Yeah, looking out versus looking in. Right.
I think, yeah.
Having that experience when we're younger of not fitting in is actually really impactful. I feel like all we want to do when we're younger is fit in. Like that is the main part of school, right? You want to be a part of the gang, the cool kids. Like that's the main thing. And if you're not, then at least I constantly question, why was I not a part of that group?
Right.
And I think that definitely impacted, like even now, the space that I've gone into connecting with people, it was originally rooted in a lack of connection when younger and didn't feel like I had found myself and therefore didn't feel like I had found my people. But the majority of the time was spent looking outwards, being like, why am I not in this group? As opposed to then being like, who am I? And then I will be the magnet for the right group.
I mean, it's that looking out point that connects it, right? Is the gaze on yourself or is it on others? And I wonder if a lot of entrepreneurs have that trait. I think the happy ones probably don't, but the ones that are kind of driven in a psychopathic way. I'm not saying I am. I don't think I am, but I think many who are. It's that whole chip on the shoulder point, right? It's like, what is the need that you're going after, and is it yours? It usually isn't. Is what I've seen.
And then also it's a scale.
Absolutely, like everything.
I definitely will have a chip on my shoulder to some degree.
Yeah.
But I'd like to, at least the story I'm telling myself is that it's not the whole picture.
Absolutely.
Which I suppose actually no founder will ever admit that that's the whole picture, or at least like most of them probably won't. But yeah, I think it's like balancing, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, and it's also about getting much better at picking the right chip to go after, right? I think that can evolve too. And yeah, it can be about some childhood thing, or it can be something that you genuinely believe in that is healthy. Again, it's about centering it on the right thing, I think.
Interestingly, about you and your younger self, had a wonderful chat with your sister earlier today. You look...
No, she was just telling me, like, here are the example snippets of what I'm going to share, and I won't comment what they were, but they weren't flattering, so I think she was joking, but yeah.
She was joking. She said the loveliest things about you. She said, he's so kind. I'd trust him with anything. He'll take care of my life insurance payout. She's like, if I die, then I'm giving all of my life insurance responsibility to Sho because he'll know how to divide it amongst who needs it.
I didn't know she had life insurance. That's good to know. Yeah. And flattering. Yeah.
She also said you have a really goofy side, which came out a lot when you were younger. You have really great comedic timing.
Interesting. I'm not sure about that. Okay. Haven't heard that. Cool.
Do you still find this fun-loving side come out now? Are you connected with that side of you still?
I think so. For me, no is the answer. It doesn't come out often. Unless I feel drunk or unless I feel extremely comfortable with the environment that I'm in. So you can, like, I imagine the feedback that I get sometimes from people is that, like, you're very serious and probably the opposite of goofy. And I think that's because I'm kind of in work mode, right? And if I'm truly prioritizing or in a space where I can feel like I can go after my own needs and not feel responsible or feel any duty towards things or people, then it comes out. And so, yeah, when I'm drunk, it will happen. When I'm at founders events and on the dance floor, it happens. And that's why I really enjoy those events. For me, actually, dance floor is where it will happen a lot. So yeah, if you see me on a night out, I'm quite different, irrespective of whether I've had, stuff to drink. But on a day-to-day, not really, sadly. I'm trying to change that for sure. I wish it did. It's only when I'm really happy and feeling like all the other needs are being met. If the company is going really well, relationships are good, family is good, then it'll come out. Then I'll be like it'll be night and day. I'm a very different person, and I can tell when it happens because I feel great. And I guess, one should ideally be like that every day. But yeah, it's something I guess I work on.
What belief is stopping you from incorporating that more?
I think it's probably less of a belief. It's more just a question of practice, where I've gone for a while focusing on fulfilling duties, I feel, in my life. And, ultimately that's a choice. I'm not blaming anyone for it. I made that choice, and that's fine. And but because of that space hasn't been there. And what I am actively working on now is to make and structure things in a way where that can come out. So yeah, I think it's about practice. It's about making that space through your choices. Yeah.
And allowing them to coexist in a way.
I think so. And knowing that if they don't coexist, it's not sustainable. Yeah.
It's almost like limiting a part of ourselves within the thing that we're spending most of our energy on, right?
Exactly. Yeah. And I think in an ideal world, you make your work feel like, it's this whole notion of like play versus work, and ideally everything is play, right? And when I heard that before, I ironically thought it was such a goofy thing for someone to say, but now I think I realize what the insight there is, and it's that you do have to let loose, and ideally you feel like you're always letting loose, even in a work environment, and you will be the most productive you can if you do that. And so, yeah, that's something I'm thinking about more. How do you bring that in?
There's an entrepreneur who's in Founders actually, but mainly is a content creator called Ali Abdal, and he described a really good journaling prompt, which just really stuck with me, which is all about this notion of making things more fun, that was the question, like, how can I make this task or this day more fun?
It's a great prompt.
If you can find play in something, like even like you were doing your emails earlier, doing like legal and tax and whatever it was, like, how can I make doing the accounting fun?
Yeah.
Is, I think, such a powerful question that can really reframe a situation, can't it?
Yeah, it really does. And finally, on the walk here, I did do that because I was like, these legals are fucking stressful, and I'm getting these stupid questions that I just can't be bothered asking. But I stopped myself and I was like, you know what? Okay, try and reframe this. Like, how can you make this feel? Yeah. It didn't work, but practice. Yeah.
The last thing, your sister described as being a rebel.
Okay. Yeah.
And she also said you got caught at customs in Japan a couple of times. She said you were quite hippie when you were younger.
Oh, wow. Did I? Maybe I did. Yeah. Well, no comment on that. But I think the rebel part is probably true. I think many entrepreneurs are, aren't they? It's just, it's something about not wanting to conform and feeling really comfortable in that non-conformity, which I guess is the flip side of that insight I wrote down, which we spoke about earlier, in that when you don't feel you're constantly having to like adapt to different situations and identities, you end up being very comfortable in that transient state. And I feel like being rebellious is a big part of that. It's like, well, I don't belong there. I don't subscribe to that either. And I think that's quite ingrained for sure. Yeah. But I'm very proud of that, actually. I think I really like it.
It's incredible. And so are you.
Yeah.
And I really appreciate you coming here and sharing everything.
Thank you.
And being so open and honest and showing your depth of wisdom. And I'm really excited for Fuse and the next stage of you bringing more of your identity into the company and this new chapter, and you taking a break between the two companies. I think that's really healthy as well. And I think what you're doing is incredible, and the praise that people, specifically within Founders, that I've heard about you is non-stop.
It's really kind.
Just deep respect for you, mate.
Thank you. It's been terrific. I've never gone this in depth for sure, and I think it requires a certain person and I'm sure practice to make that happen. So thanks a lot.